Welcome, everyone. Good evening. And we can still say Chodesh Tov, happy month of Shvat, as we are beginning the month of Shvat. Just remember, 2 weeks from today, Tu B'Shvat, 2 weeks from that, the 1st of Adar, 2 weeks from that, Purim, 2 weeks from that, the 1st of Nisan, 2 weeks from that, Passover. So the moral of it is that time to start cleaning. No, I'm joking. All right, today we're going to discuss the Jews of Morocco, which is a very, very important subject for several reasons. First of all, until the establishment of the State of Israel, there were 250,000, 250,000 Jews of Morocco, making the Jews of Morocco the largest Jewish community in a Muslim country. So actually, it's an extremely important community. Just looking at the size is already makes it very significant. The other thing about Moroccan Jewry is the fact that Morocco, if you remember the map, if you remember your geography lessons, it's on sort of the northwestern tip of Africa, and it's literally, not literally, but almost touching Spain. So it's sort of a bridge between North Africa and Spain, and we're going to see that it had many exchanges with Spain. It's a very, very close to Spain, and so the Jews from Spain and Morocco sort of go back and forth. And another thing is that it's connected to North Africa. It ends up being also colonized by the French. So you can, between all that, you can see that Moroccan Jews really encompassed in them many different cultures. They had in them French culture, obviously Jewish culture, Spanish, Ladino, Arabic, and then you have in the Atlas Mountains, the Berber tribes. So they're really a mixture of a lot of very, very important cultures. Even Moroccan Jewry itself can be divided sort of by 3 groups. You have the groups that live right off the coast of Spain, the area of Tangier, and that is Jews who really basically left Spain with a 1 hour commute or something. As they skip over Gibraltar and there they are. Then you have the Jews who are more of the Arabic Jews that are I don't know if it's the Mustarbim who were early on, but it's the Jews who speak Arabic are connected to North African culture. And then you have also the Jews in the Atlas Mountains, more of the with the tribes that live in the mountains, and that's also a separate group. So there's very, very much mixing going on in Moroccan culture, just taking from so many places. Moroccan Jews changed the lives of all of us, especially with the prominence of Moroccan Jews in Israel and Israeli culture. So from music, the chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Amar, was, well, now he's, I think, the chief rabbi of Jerusalem. He is Moroccan. Many senior politicians, many senior people in the military, a lot of them are Moroccan. And it's also important to note that when the Moroccans came to Israel, they actually did something very important geographically, which I wasn't even aware of to this day. David Ben-Gurion looked at the country and he said, we're not going to survive like this. Why? Because you have a couple of Jews living in kibbutzim up north. You have a couple of Jews in Tel Aviv. You have a couple of Jews in Eilat and a couple of Jews in Jerusalem. We need to have a continuous place of living that unites and brings the country together. Meaning, if every place is isolated, then in case of a war, then you can cut places off. That's what happened in 1948 to Jerusalem. So David Ben-Gurion's vision was to create some kind of residential continuity, a belt that will go all the way from Nahariya to Beersheba, and then also all the way from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, of small towns. And the people who he settled in those places, or in the people who he asked to come to those places, were often Moroccan Jews, and they really built those towns and cities, and they still live there today, unlike many of the kibbutzim, which were built by idealistic socialists up north, who they later either left or became non-socialists. Moroccan Jews really stuck to the plan in the sense that they still live in many of the towns that they settled in 1948 to 1956, 64, and they really create the backbone the backbone of Israel, and really it's something that they impact Israeli society in a great way. Another thing is the rabbis. The rabbis in Morocco, I don't want to diss any Ashkenazi rabbis, but the rabbis in Morocco were very, very much part of the community, very warm and very caring. The rabbi was also the mohel. The rabbi did everything and was very much a part of the community. You're going to see that in even their halachic decisions, even in the decisions on Jewish law. The Moroccan rabbis are much more lenient. They're much more with the people. They much more understand what the needs are and what their decisions will mean for the lives of people, and so they are much more integrated, and that's something that gave them popularity. That's why in Israel, you go to every restaurant. Anyone ever go to a restaurant, see a picture of either the Baba Sali? Actually, probably restaurants here in New York too. You have Rabbi Abu Chatzira, the Baba Sali, whoever it may be. Is there, and that's because the Moroccans really loved their rabbis and their rabbis loved them. There was this real closeness and communal integration that the religious leadership and the lay leadership or just the common folks enjoyed, and that's something that really they've imparted to general Jewish society. Yes.
When I went to Israel,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just going to mention it. Yes, the Sephardic food in Israel is very powerful. The kibbeh, the cigars. By the way, but those, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, are Iraqi. The kibbeh is Iraqi. Then you have Yemenite. I'm actually not an expert on Moroccan cuisine, but I think it's more of the sweeter foods, and I think that's more Moroccan. But yeah, the Sephardic food definitely shaped Israel and gave Israel its best. With all my respect to Ashkenazi culture, I got some hate for saying this before. I'll say it again. Ashkenazi Jews contributed a lot to our heritage, but I would say that in the field of food, definitely the far better contribution comes from our Sephardic brethren. You don't see many people going out to eat in Israel at an Ashkenazi restaurant, and that's for a reason. But I apologize if it hurts anyone's feelings, and definitely there's what to be said also for Ashkenazi food. But basically, yeah, the Moroccan culture really, when Moroccans immigrated to Israel, they left and continue to leave a huge impact. A lot of people don't know that. You mentioned Fauda 4. Many of the actors and actresses that are the powerhouses of Israel, whether it's Lior Raz, Yaela Bouxis, many of these actors are Moroccan. And so Moroccans are really the backbone of Israeli society in many, many ways. And this is partially due to the fact that Morocco was such a cosmopolitan place with the influence of so many different cultures, so many different languages, whether it's French, Spanish, Arabic, the tribes in the south, whatever it was. The society was very much a cosmopolitan society. Yes.
Just in the Republic of nothing.
We're gonna speak. Yeah, Moroccans. By the way, yeah, I don't want to go through all the prominent Moroccans there are today, but I believe that not far from us, actually, I don't know if this. Let me just, for the record, I can't confirm the story. But do you know the Sony building on, what is it, the corner of 58th and 3rd? Huge, beautiful building. So from what I heard once, this could be an urban legend. I don't want to be careful when I say it, but there's a fellow named Meir Shitrit who lives in Manhattan, and he bought the Sony building. He's a Moroccan Jew, and when you buy a building that's worth that much, you need someone who's a guarantor to guarantee the assets. Who was his guarantor? From what I heard, the king of Morocco signed on, because the current king of Morocco is very, very friendly to Jews. He has a great relationship with Jews. And so the king of Morocco signed on for this Meir Shitrit as a guarantor for buying the Sony building. So yeah, definitely there's a lot of achieved Mm-hmm. The King's Circle. Wow. Yeah. Wow. Oh, that's amazing. What was his name? Shasha. All right. So we're going to get to this, but let's just a moment step back and get it all in chronology. So again, the Moroccan Jews really have contributed greatly to who we are today. And interestingly, there's a very special connection between Moroccan Jews and Hebrew in many, many, many ways. Many of the piyutim and the grammar and a lot of the stuff that happened in the 9th and 10th century happened in Morocco. And then it was exported to Spain. One of the commentaries that Rashi mentions a lot is Donash ibn Lavart, who is Moroccan. And a lot of the early enthusiasm for Hebrew structure, for Hebrew poetry, actually started in Morocco, continued to Spain, and went on to the rest of Europe. So really, they did shape a lot of who we are today. In fact, Moroccans in the 10th century were the only Jewish community in the world who were called on to serve as head of yeshivas in the yeshiva in Israel. Usually Israel was an exporter of Jewish knowledge of the Talmud, but because Morocco had such strong scholarship, they were called to serve in Israel. So that's something that's noteworthy. But where did it all start? So when do you think the first Jews arrived in Morocco? So there's what we have documented and archaeology, and then there's also certain traditions. So already in the 2nd century, there's archaeological evidence of Jews in Morocco. There's a Roman city called Volubilis, and over there they found a menorah-shaped lamp. You can see a picture of it online. There's also a area that many believe was a synagogue. There's a Jewish tombstone. And so Jews already in this city of Volubilis, which is Roman, a bit north of Meknes, for those who know the geography, is where Jews settled already in the 2nd century. There are traditions among Moroccan Jews that claim that they actually arrived in Morocco during the time of the First Temple. And they have traditions that they arrived there on Phoenician ships, which actually checks out with the history because the Phoenicians did send ships from the area of Israel to Morocco. There's a great historian named Henry Abramson who points out the fact that unlike many other diaspora communities, the Jews in Morocco were not speaking Aramaic. They were speaking Hebrew. And that means that they are more likely indeed to have arrived during the time of the First Temple rather than during the Second Temple. By the time the Second Temple comes around, we are all speaking Aramaic. And so the Moroccan Jews early on are speaking Hebrew, and that's sort of evidence for the fact that they are older than just being expelled after the Second Temple. However, that being said, Josephus does note that after the destruction of the Second Temple, 30,000 Jews were sent as slaves to Morocco. Morocco was part of the Roman Empire, and the Jews are sent there as slaves. In the 2nd century, there's something called the Diaspora Rebellion against Rome, which is mostly happening in Libya, where Jews rebel again against Rome. And many have a belief that Jews then would go from, after they were escaping the wrath of the Romans, they left Libya to Morocco. As the years go on, the life of Jews in Morocco isn't too terrible until the Byzantine Empire arrives, the Christian Byzantine Empire, and that's when they turn synagogues into churches. They make laws. They did the same thing in Spain. They passed, and in France, as we've seen, they passed laws against Jews. And in fact, as the years go on, that becomes a bit better. But when things get worse in Spain, and we're going to see this happens a lot, Jews go to Morocco. It's sort of, I'm trying to think of a community where that also happens. I guess it's sort of like Canada and America, where people can sort of alternate a bit. So when things get tough for Jews in Spain, they come to Morocco. So when the Visigoths come in the 7th century, then that's when the Jews from Spain flee to Morocco. Interestingly, once the Muslims take over 700-800, that's when already life gets a bit unstable and difficult for Jews in Morocco. Why? Because under Muslim law, does everyone know what it is under Muslim law? Basically, there's a set of rules that make life not great but livable. So, unlike what it was in the many of the Christian areas. So, if you are living under Muslim rule, you have to do two things. One is you have to pay the jizya, which is a Jewish tax, and B, you have to be a dhimmi, which means you have to be sort of inferior to the Muslims around you. You can't build a synagogue bigger than the mosque. If I don't know exactly the rules, but basically, if a Muslim is riding on a horse, you can't. Or if they're riding on a donkey, you can't be riding on a horse. Or if they're walking, you can't be riding a dog. Whatever it is, you can't show yourself to be more. But if it's respected and preserved, definitely in the dark ages, it's a great deal. It gives you some kind of security. And so that's sort of the steady road that Jews take in Morocco. But I want to warn you, do not assume that things were great. A lot of times we assume that the Jews in European countries went through pogroms and killings and expulsions, and that things were basically static for the Jews in the Arab countries in Morocco. No, it was not. There were times of persecution. There were some serious pogroms. And there were times where things got really, really worse. But that wasn't for a while. In the 900s, Jews lived mostly in the city of Fez. Actually, one of the greatest scholars of the Talmud, he's printed, his work is printed at the end of every copy of the Talmud, is Rabbi Yitzchak Al-Fasi, which means from Fez. He didn't necessarily live in Fez, but Fez, the city in Morocco, becomes this center of Jewish life with a lot of scholarship and knowledge and really creativity being produced. I mentioned already Dunash ben Lavart, who's cited often by Rashi, and there are other scholars who are there, and Judaism is really thriving, culture, language, etc. And like I said, even the yeshivot in Israel import scholars from Morocco. It's important to note, even though geographically Morocco is closer to Spain, but since it belongs to the Muslim world, traveling is much easier in the Muslim world. So if you're a young Jew in Morocco, you can think about, and many actually end up doing this, going to study in yeshiva in Baghdad sooner than you can think about often going to study in yeshiva in France or in Germany, even though it may have been a bit shorter for you to do that, or parts of Spain. But nonetheless, since one is under Muslim conquest and one is under Christian conquest, the two shall not mix. And therefore, many Jews from Morocco have an easy commute to Baghdad, to Israel, even though it's much farther geographically, because it's just under the same government. It's under the same rule, and you speak the same language. You can speak in Baghdad the same language that you've been speaking in Fez or Rabat. And so that's exactly what happens. Young Jews go study in the great yeshivas of Babylon, in the great yeshivas in Israel, and that actually enriches both communities in terms of the scholarship that is achieved. In the 1100s, the condition of Jews gets worse and worse as this dynasty called the El Murabiton takes over. And then we have in 1033 the massacre of the Jews of Fez. 6,000 Jews are massacred in Fez. And again, sometimes we just assume things were terrible in Ashkenaz countries, but in Morocco not. That is not the case. There were pogroms, there were killings, and in 1033 you have a massacre of 6,000 Jews of Fez. It was not the last time that happened. Unfortunately, there were other killings. Later on, you have the takeover of a dynasty shortly thereafter called the El Muwahidin. And if you speak Arabic, which I think you do, right? What does that sound like? Wahad? One. And so they are very into the concept of God being one, and they are religious zealots, which never ends well for anybody. And they take over Morocco and even parts of Spain. And this is where famously Maimonides flees his home in Spain, and many, many, many thousands of Jews come under their conquest. They do not follow the accepted Muslim law. What's the accepted Muslim law? That is that you must make sure that you treat the Jews with respect. Yes, they need to pay the Jiza tax. Yes, they need to be dhimmi second-class citizens, but they have protection. These folks, the El Muwahidin, were zealots, no Jews whatsoever, no one who does not believe in Islam. Furthermore, even those who convert to Islam are second-class citizens and need to be sort of wearing a special hat, sort of like a red badge on them, a yellow star, sorry. And they are absolute zealots. They do not let Jews live as Jews. And this is when Maimonides leaves Spain to Morocco, and later he flees to Israel and then to Egypt. Actually, interestingly, if you go to Fez today, you can see the house that Maimonides lived in and worked in and wrote many of his works. So Morocco was very much a part of the life of Maimonides. Here he writes a very famous letter. The letter is called Igeret Hashmad, and that is the letter of people who live under Shmad. Now, Shmad is a hard term to translate. Does anyone know what Shmad means? Anybody? Shmad? So Shmad, well, literally means destroyed, but it means different things in different Jewish cultures. Under the Romans, Shmad meant oppression, but also the need to abandon your Judaism. So Shmad can either be actual destruction or the destruction of Judaism. And what happened was many Jews who converted to Islam wanted to know, are we still Jews? Are you still a Jew? Furthermore, we have a rule that hopefully nobody here ever has to deal with. And the rule is, if someone comes to you and says, either you accept another religion or I kill you, what is the law? Well, let me take a step back. If someone comes over to you and holds a gun and says, you either eat on Yom Kippur or I kill you, what's the law? The law is in Judaism that saving a life and preserving life takes top priority, except in three situations. One of them is worshiping Avodah Zarah. One of them is leaving your religion. Now, this law was put into place or was articulated during the time of the Romans. And during the time of the Romans, if you wanted to abandon Judaism, that was to worship pure idols. But the question then becomes, what if someone wants to force you to convert to Islam, which is a monotheistic religion? Do you have that obligation to give your life not to leave Judaism? Or can you say that since being a monotheist is part of Islam, therefore there's no obligation to give your life? What is the law? We know that in Ashkenaz, during the Crusades, the unanimous understanding of Jews was that you must give your life in order not to convert to Christianity and to convert out of Judaism. The Jews living in Muslim countries had a different kind of question, being what happens if you have someone trying to force you to convert to Islam? Are you obligated to give your life the way Jews did under Roman occupation and under Catholicism, or is it a different kind of story? So first of all, not many, huge amounts, not just a couple of thousand, huge amounts of Jews converted to Islam. And in this conversion, they had to make a declaration that is common among Muslims today. And it basically says, La ilaha illallah, there's no God other than Allah. But it also adds a clause, which I forget in Arabic, saying that you believe Muhammad is the prophet of God. Is that considered something that a Jew must give their life not to do? And many Jews who did convert to Islam were told by Jewish zealots, you see, everyone has their zealots. I mean, it's different grades, but whatever. But many Jews were told by some Jewish zealots, if you didn't give your life, you're out. You're not one of us. And this is where Maimonides writes a very, very strong letter. And he says, it's called the Igeret Hashmad, the letter of Shmad. He says, if you converted out of fear for your life, first of all, you don't have to give your life. Second of all, if you did, welcome back. You can come to shul. You can still enjoy cholent at Kiddush. Well, not cholent, they have better food. But you can still be part of our community. It's okay. If you were forced to convert to Islam and chose to do so under their duress, it's not, we're not judging. Basically, it says, we don't judge you. And this is also very much what Maimonides did in his approach to dealing with Yemenite Jews who dealt also with a similar situation of forced conversions, where he said, if you came and for a few years you said, I am a Muslim, and you lived, with saying all the declarations, then that's fine, no problem, don't worry about it. Why? Because it's a monotheistic religion. So it's not like you worshipped Avodah Zarah. You didn't go and worship idols, and therefore it's not a problem. We're going to see later in 1492 that the dealing with Jews who converted to Christianity was much more difficult. And that's a whole different story. The Jews, the converso Jews, but by and large, converso Jews were also accepted back. There were always, I don't want to call them names, but there were always the extremist Jews who were not nice to those who converted. And you can't judge them either, by the way, because if you gave up your house, your livelihood, everything you had, and you left Spain, for example, in order not to live as a Christian, and then your neighbor lived for 10 years as a declared Christian, went to church every single Sunday, and then showed up in wherever you were living in Amsterdam with all their wealth and everything, you probably would not be too kind to them. You would feel like you were a better Jew. Is that correct? You would probably, you're very modest and humble, but most people, you would feel like, wait, I gave up everything in order to be a Jew, and you just sold out and lived as a Christian for 10 years and got out with all your money. It's hard to really judge any party, but the bottom line is that Maimonides wrote a very strong letter and ruling to the Jews in Igeret Hashmad, saying, speaking about the whole concept of giving your life for Judaism, about Kiddush Hashem, and also saying that if you accepted Islam as your religion, you are not in violation of this principle of Yahareg ve'al Ya'avor. Which is why, by the way, we're going to see centuries later, the Jews of Morocco had a special, and Yemen, had a special place in their heart for Maimonides. Very few people know this, but Yemenite Jews follow the rulings of Maimonides with no addition or change to this day. They are Maimonides radicals. Why? Because one of the reasons is Maimonides was there for them. He cared. He saw their situation. He himself was faced by these El Muwahidin who were very, very, very dangerous. But nonetheless, he understood it, he sympathized, and he encouraged the Jews. He even spoke out against the disparagers. He spoke out against the Jewish extremists who said, if you converted to Islam, we don't want to see you in shul next week. He was very supportive of the Jews. So it's important to have this perspective in mind just when speaking about Jews living under the conquest of the El Muwahidin, etc. In not much later, 1137, there was again a massacre in Fez, and this is when the Jews were moved into a sort of ghetto. It was called the Melach, not like Melach like salt, but Melach, and it was, people think of ghettos as a punishment. In the case of Moroccan Jews, it was done for protection. Meaning the Sultan saw that people were heckling the Jews and attacking them violently. So he said, why don't you all move to these houses that are near my palace, and I can protect you over there. Do you guys think that's a good idea or a bad idea? Seems like a good idea because that's where he can protect them. But it turned out to be something that was to their detriment. Why? Because if all the Jews live in one place, and let's say the Sultan's out on vacation, then the anti-Semites know where to find them. So it was a well-intended idea, and in fact, Jews for centuries later lived not only in Morocco, in the Melach, which is the ghetto, basically, it's the area, but it's actually done for protection. But it ended up hurting Jews economically. If all the Jews have to live in the same area, you have to, everyone's opening the same shop. Schwartz's shoes, how many Schwartz's shoes can you have in one neighborhood? And so it becomes difficult. And so it ended up hurting the Jews socially, physically. And in fact, in 1165, almost all the Jews in Fez, which is the crown jewel of Moroccan Jewry, were almost all murdered. And so moving to the Mellah was a tough one. Fast forward to 1492, you have the persecution of Jews in Spain. And this is when about 20 to 40,000 Jews moved from Spain to Morocco, a huge influx. Interestingly, some of them, this is a little known fact, because life was so hard for them as immigrants, some even moved back to Spain, few, but some, and the others ended up integrating. What is not discussed often is the integration and the difficulties of integration of Spanish Jews in Morocco. So immediately thereafter, you have the question, if 20,000 Jews move into your town and your community, and remember, in those days, it wasn't like today where we're all aware that everyone has their own custom and you have one block of Jews and there's 5 different shuls and this guy's Sephardic and Ashkenazi and Hasidish and Lithuanian and Yeki and Poland. This is a homogeneous community. And suddenly you have an influx of 20 to 40,000 Spanish Jews. What do you do in terms of your customs? Who has to accommodate who? Do the immigrants have to adapt the custom of where they move to? Or can we find a way to compromise? What do you do about that? That's, well, now we have a melting pot, right? The Yemenite, yeah, listen, for sure, we live in an age of a melting pot because over the past 100 years, basically, almost every single Jew has been displaced, right? So there are very few Jews who've been living in the same place for the past 100 years. And so we're all in sort of a melting pot figuring ourselves out. That's why in Israel, where you have people from so many different communities, there's like a mishmash of customs and everyone has a bit of everything. But you have these Spanish Jews, they move to Morocco, and it's very difficult to know whose customs you should follow. And so it becomes a bit of a problem. And between 1500 and 1535, it's so sad for me, by the way, to say this, because it's so Jewish and it's such a tragedy of our history, because we have a lot of tragedies in our history, but when we fight over nothing, that's really sad. And so there's this whole debate. I cannot even begin to explain to you the debate because it's so obscure. So there's this debate about shechita. You have to check the animal after shechita, and one of the ways to check the animal's lungs to make sure if the animal wasn't sick or missing a limb is by blowing the lungs up to make sure there's no hole in them. This is after shechita. The Spanish Jews do it one way, the Moroccan Jews do it another way, and boom, this is the biggest rift between Spanish Jews and Moroccan Jews. It's like you laugh at it now, but you know what? There's a lot of things we fight about today that I'm sure in a few hundred years people will be like, is that really what they fought about? So we always find these obscure things to fight about, right? Do you eat kitniyot? Do you not eat kitniyot? Do you, do you wash before Kiddush, after Kiddush, during Kiddush? There's always these things that we find. This debate actually tears up Moroccan and Spanish Jews. But interestingly, eventually, and this is a fascinating thing just about Spanish Jewry, the custom of the Spanish Jews becomes the dominant custom, not only in Morocco, in many places. And you got to appreciate the power of that, the power of the Spanish customs and culture, that wherever the Spanish people were expelled to, the Spanish Jews were expelled to, their custom became the dominant one. It speaks to the beautiful, the appealing minhagim and way of life that they had. Anyhow, but it takes a while until the Spanish customs become the dominant ones in Morocco. But eventually that's what happens. Later on, the Alawites, which is I don't know if anyone knows what Alawites are. I'm sure you do, by the way. Alawites, it's the denomination that I don't want to mention him because he's a horrible person. Bashar Assad in Hafez al-Assad. It's their own. They have their own denomination and of Islam, and they take over in Morocco. And in 1698, the Sephardic custom becomes so prominent in Morocco that they publish a book called Takanot HaMegorashim, which literally means the edicts and the laws of those who were expelled. And so the laws of the Spanish Jews really become the prominent one. Even Ladino becomes a very popular language. It's interesting, if you're a Moroccan Jew, you could have been speaking Ladino, you could have been speaking Judeo-Arabic, and you could have been speaking some of the Berber tribes' dialects of Arabic. So there was a lot going on there, but Ladino becomes very, very prominent. And in the 1600s, Moroccan Jewry becomes a very prominent a Jewish community, so much so that letters about Jewish law are sent to it, what to do. And even people go fundraising from Poland to Morocco. And especially considering the pogroms and the difficulties going on in Poland, it makes sense to go to Morocco to ask for support. Slowly but surely, the community establishes itself. And in the 1800s, you already have colonization and European influences. This is when Paris comes to Morocco. And that is I didn't speak about it enough last week. In 1860, in Paris, Jews found the Alliance Israélite Universelle. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. But they announced this Jewish federation, sort of the first modern Jewish federation. And one of their goals is to improve the condition of Jews in the Middle East. And they established networks of schools that are meant to teach trade, French, science, and sort of advance the status of the Jews. In some communities, I do not believe, I may be wrong, I do not believe that their goal was to assimilate Jews, but their goal was really just to improve the lives of Jews by teaching them trade and science, etc. But in some communities, there was this animosity. A bit in Baghdad, there was a sort of a clash. The rabbis saw the new schools as a way of assimilating young people and threatening the Jewish community, but not in Morocco. Many of the rabbis actually even sent their own kids there. And actually, Moroccan Jewry is a beautiful example of integrating pragmatic modernity with tradition. You don't have what's going on in Paris. You don't have what's going on in Berlin, where it's either you're Orthodox or you have a profession. Either you're Orthodox or you get an education. It's one or the other. That does not happen, and Moroccans really beautifully integrate modernity with tradition without having any major rifts. Here's something that really, really blew my mind. I'm having a hard time getting over it. Maybe you'll help me. Later on, when World War II begins, you have the French government. The Vichy government in southern France is an ally of Hitler, and it's a puppet government of Hitler. The Vichy government takes over France, and they start implementing not Hitler's final solution, but the race laws the way they were implemented in Italy. Namely, Jews are barred from civil service, they're barred from the professions like being doctors, lawyers, etc. They're sent out of schools, and they have it tough until the Allies start landing in Operation Torch, which is actually, just from a military perspective, a fascinating and brilliant American achievement. The fact that I don't want to get into it, but the fact that America decided first to make sure that they have North Africa and that North Africa is clear of Nazis ended up being a brilliant move, which was not to be taken for granted. But as the Americans are coming, the French pogrom against the Jews, meaning the French soldiers of the Vichy government were actually angry that the Americans were winning. We always judge France favorably in the sense that we say, okay, maybe they had no choice. They were under Nazi occupation. In Morocco, the French soldiers pogromed the Jews as retribution for the upcoming American forces. They were siding with the Nazis, and so they were angry that the Americans are coming, and so they took their anger out on the Jews. It wasn't the first time, by the way, in Moroccan history where the Jews got clobbered from both sides. So if one army is coming, so then both sides, right before the wars decided, go to the Jewish quarter and they just beat everyone up and loot the stores. So it's tough to be Jewish in the sense that you get it from both sides. But the fact that the French were willing to pogrom the Jews because they saw the Americans winning is really, really, really damning evidence against the French. It shows that really they were not victims of the Germans as much as they were sympathizing with them. Definitely in the case of this Vichy government. But as the time goes on, the Moroccan Jews are liberated by 1942, and they actually start doing a lot to support the Jews of Europe. And famously, the Lubavitcher Rebbe later sends a lot of his people to Morocco to teach people Judaism, to make sure there's a strong Jewish education. But as happens across the Arab world, when Israel gains its independence, things sour for the Jews. The local population attacks the Jews, and slowly but surely, Morocco goes from having 250,000 Jews in 1948 to having 160,000 Jews by 1956. Most people go to Israel. Many actually go to France. Some go to the United States and Canada. Montreal has a large Moroccan Jewish community. And in 1956, Morocco declares independence. And when it declares independence, it joins the Arab League. It joins Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was not a fan of the Jewish people. And it ends up that the Jews leave in such numbers that today I think there are fewer than 3,000 Jews in Morocco, although it is still one of the only Muslim countries with such a large population. So you have, I don't think there are any Jews in Libya, Algeria, Egypt, but Morocco has 3,000 Jews, which is not great, but it definitely speaks to a more tolerant and friendly country. A lot of people go to even Passover programs in Morocco. So much as Jews had to leave there on an unpleasant note, there is still this friendship. I mentioned Mr. Chitrit and the King of Morocco, and there is this kinship. Moroccan Jews have many customs, I think, that are important to note. Obviously, does everyone know what a henna is? Where they do the party for the bride before the night before the wedding. They paint, the red paint. Another interesting custom they do is the Shabbat before the wedding. Unlike Ashkenazi Jews, the bride and the groom are together at the home of the bride. You don't have the same separation. And I cannot go here into the details of what's involved in a Moroccan Jewish wedding, but it is magnificent. The amount of days of celebration, of food, of customs. It's really, it's a lecture in and of itself. If you see the pictures of what the bride wears, the amount of jewelry and dresses, it's a multi-day festival. It's unbelievable. If you ever get a chance to be part of that celebration, that's really great. Another very interesting custom is called a tahdid, and that is if someone has a baby, the father goes in with a big sword and goes around the room around the mom and the baby to sort of dispel any bad spirits and sort of marks the territory. And at the same time, everyone comes and sings and does good things. I want to just say something very important in terms of literacy and education, very powerful among Moroccan Jews. When a woman has a baby boy, the person who comes to visit before the Brit is the teacher, the melamed tinokot. So the teacher comes. Not only that, when the baby has the pidyon ben, after that, at 40 days, you bring a 40-day baby to the school where they're taught the alphabet. So it's really a very, very, and it has to do also with what I said about the rabbis being part of the life of everyone. So can you imagine the teacher comes to visit the baby comes to the school. It was really a close-knit, warm community with very, very high rates of literacy and really this huge joy, just abundant joy, whether we're talking about weddings, hennas, the celebration, you have the tahdid when the child is born, famously in Israel, the mimuna right after Passover, where you celebrate the ability to eat chametz. It's really a a joy-filled culture. Sorry? They still do. Yeah, Mimuna became like a national Israeli holiday. Yes. But it's really a culture that's absolutely filled with joy, warmth, and everyone's friends. People celebrate together. People go through the life cycle together in a way that you don't see in many other communities. Again, I encourage anyone who can to see what's involved in a Moroccan wedding, because it's not just a family. Everyone brings food. Everyone helps make the food. Everyone helps make the celebration. It's really just an abundance of joy, of community. It's a very, very warm community. Everyone comes together. We should go to a Moroccan wedding. And it's sure, I know some of the people are watching online for sure will be able to invite us. And I'm going to put this out there. If you're watching and you have a Moroccan wedding coming up or a simcha that you can invite us to, we're signing up. All right. If anyone has questions, comments, you're welcome to. Otherwise, I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Be'ezrat Hashem, next week will be the final in the series on different locations. And it will be about the Jews of America. Because Jews have been here for a couple of hundred years. I know it seems like we just started here, but there's already customs and already lots of history of Jews in America. So Be'ezrat Hashem, next week it's going to be about the Jews of America. And for those who are asking, all recordings of these talks are on YouTube on the channel of Park East Synagogue. And I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Be'ezrat Hashem, next week we'll speak about the Jews of America. Wishing everyone good night. Thank you.